Dominionism were already around. The origins of our modern Dominionist story began in Dallas in 1980 when James Robison called together a group of conservative pastors. Robison had already called for God's people to come out of the closet and take back the nation. He named this group the Religious Roundtable. In August, Robison persuaded his group to team up with like-minded Christian fundamentalist Jerry Falwell and his moral majority, and a Republican political operative by the name of Paul Weyrich. The group initially came together to sponsor a rally in Reunion Arena. It was a huge success, drawing more than 15,000 Christian lay and ordained pastors. So, just who is Paul Weyrich? He was an American religious conservative political activist and a commentator associated with the New Right. He co-founded the Heritage Foundation, and after the Second Vatican Council, he transferred his membership from the Latin Church of the Roman Catholic Church to the Melkite Greek Catholic Church, and there he was ordained as a deacon. In 1980, he was invited to speak at the Southern Baptist Convention, where he said this: "We are different from previous generations of conservatives. We are no longer working to preserve the status quo. We are radicals, working to overturn the present power structure of this country." Weyrich, who again was a Catholic, wanted a political coalition with evangelicals for two reasons. First, unlike mainline Protestants and Catholics, evangelicals at this time in history tended to focus on conversion, and thus they traveled to preach, attended giant rallies, and they used radio and TV, making them a messaging machine. Second, most evangelicals were already Republicans due to LBJ's passage of the Civil Rights Act and former President Nixon's public friendship with Billy Graham, even though Graham was quoted to say, "I don't want to see religious bigotry in any form. It would disturb me if there was a wedding between the religious fundamentalists and the political right." Weyrich explained it this way: "We're talking about Christianizing America." In his mind, democracy was not as important as victory, because he said it this way: "Elections are not won by a majority of people. Our leverage in the elections goes up as the voting populace goes down." In other words, he didn't want everybody to vote, he only wanted certain people to vote. Shortly after the 1980 rally, Weyrich began to construct a network that would become the Council on National Policy. At that time, it consisted of the Heritage Foundation, the Republican Study Committee, ALEC, which was a group of conservative legislators originally called together by the Koch brothers, the Moral Majority, and the Religious Roundtable. So the real origins of the evangelical voting bloc and the right-wing movement as far as voting goes originated with the joining of fundamental evangelicalism and Catholicism in Jerry Falwell and Paul Weyrich, two people who were diametrically opposed theologically, but who had a common goal: to galvanize evangelical voters to change society. Before I answer the question that the title asks, I want to lay a little bit more historical background. In 1950, the National Council of Churches formed, and it has sought to effect positive change for the betterment of society. They seek to bring equal rights and complete justice for all men in all stations of life, protect the worker from dangerous machinery, occupational disease, injuries, and mortality, the abolition of child labor, regulation of the conditions of toil for women, and safeguard the physical and moral health of the community, a living wage as a minimum in every industry, provisions for the old age of workers and for those incapacitated by injury, and the abatement of poverty. That's what the National Council of Churches advocate. Now, all of these are great things to advocate for, and I don't really have any issues with any of these things. And in fact, these are Christian principles. And prior to this, the World Council of Churches was organized and founded in 1948 to work for the cause of ecumenicalism. The World Council of Churches, quote, acts through both its member churches and the religious and social organizations to coordinate ecumenical, evangelical, and social action, with special attention given to social justice, world peace, stopping the threat of nuclear war, hunger, and other very worthy causes. Many mainline Protestant churches have joined the World Council of Churches and the National Council of Churches, along with the Roman Catholic Church, the Assyrian Church of the East, the Oriental and Orthodox churches, and most jurisdictions of the Eastern Orthodox Church. So seeing how these seem to be very worthwhile causes, what's the problem? Well, the problem is that they have put their quest to solve these social problems ahead of their desire to preserve their own doctrines. They have compromised their faith for man-made solutions to the world's problems, and that's called humanism. The rush for ecumenical solutions has caused them to give up their core values, and they no longer bear any resemblance to their historical forebears. They have joined forces with people that they have very little in common with theologically to solve the country's problems and the world's problems. They put theological differences aside and they joined hands and they came together. And what do you think happens when you do that? You compromise your faith eventually. And they did. Jesus said this to the church in Thyatira, "But I have this against you, that you tolerate that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess and is teaching and seducing my servants to practice sexual immorality and to eat food sacrificed to idols." He said that in Revelation chapter 2, verse 20. And in 1 Corinthians 15:33, we read, "Do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals." And in Galatians 5:9, we see, "A little leaven leavens the whole lump." So many churches in the World Council of Churches and the National Council of Churches have tolerated false churches. They've tolerated their bad company and their leaven to solve their common problems. And now they are in idolatry and they have ruined their once good morals. Now this is what is happening to evangelical and charismatic churches because of dominionism and Christian nationalism. And here is where we come to the title of our message, and the problem with dominionism and Christian nationalism. Which version of Christianity do we choose? You see, Christian nationalism and dominionism is made up of all brands and varieties of people that call themselves Christian, who say we must be this Christian nation, and the reason they say this is because they are identifying an issue they want to solve by the actions of man. They want to solve it at the ballot box and through legislation, which is no different than what the now liberal denominations sought to do with the World Council of Churches and the National Council of Churches. And the exact same thing is happening to evangelicals and charismatics. They are compromising their identity and their theology and their doctrine for a cause. Since when should the Southern Baptist Convention ask a Catholic to speak at its conference? As you can see, that error occurred 44 years ago. Since when should a leader in evangelical faith join hands with someone he teaches from the pulpit is going to hell and is a heretic in order to gain political power? Jerry Falwell did this with Paul Weyrich. Is this what the apostles would have done? Is this what Jesus teaches us in the scripture? If you think so, please point me to a scripture that says that we must join hands with heretics in order to achieve political power, and leave that in the comments. I would love to see it. The only thing we are told in the New Testament about politics to do is to pay our taxes and pray for our leaders, even if they're throwing us to lions, and we must honor them even when they're about to crucify us upside down. That's what the scripture teaches us about politics. Yet the dominionists like Hank Kunneman will have Catholics lead their churches in prayer, which, by the way, the prayer that they led was a theosophist prayer, wasn't even a Christian prayer, and they'll have Mormons lead their meetings, and Christians with no morals call for only Christians to hold public office, which is against the U.S. Constitution. So I ask, which version of Christianity are we going to have dominionists impose upon this country? And make no mistake, this is what they say they want, as I have proven. They say that they want Christianity imposed upon this country. They say it must be imposed. So which version are we going to have? Are we going to have the Catholic version of Christianity? That's the Christianity of of General Mike Flynn and Steve Bannon, who are both devout, hardcore Catholics? Is this the Christianity of Matt Walsh and Sean Hannity, who are also devout Catholics? They would have you be Catholic, which teaches that you must be constantly regenerated into salvation. Are we going to have the Mormon version of Christianity opposed upon us? The Christianity of Dominionist Glenn Beck and Mike Lee? The Christianity that teaches Jesus is just another son of God and that you too can be a God? Is that the version that we must choose and compromise with? Are we going to have the charismatic version of Christianity imposed upon us? Will we have to submit to Paula White's version of Christianity since she is Donald Trump's chief pastoral influence? Will we have to submit to Kenneth Copeland's version? Will we have to submit to the Pentecostal version of Christianity, a version of Christianity that so many Dominionists come from, that teach that if you do not speak in tongues, you are not saved? What about the modalist version of Pentecostalism that says that there is no Trinity? Do we have to submit to that version of Dominionism? So which version of a Christian nation do you want to be? Because there is a literal Easter egg basket of Dominionists out there from all branches of quote-unquote Christianity, and many of them are heretics. Many of them are false Christians that are calling for this version of Christianity. Which one are you going to serve? Because right now, these all so-called versions are joining hands to fight what they do not like happening in the country. And instead of trusting a faithful Creator, they are trusting in themselves and political actions. Baptists are joining hands with Catholics and Mormons and putting aside their theological differences and speaking at the same conferences from behind the same pulpits with each other, and they're allowing each other to come to their churches because of a common evil. And if you think this ends any differently than what happens with the World Council of Churches or National Council of Churches, you're kidding yourself. And in fact, it's already happening. 30, 40, or 50 years ago, would a Mormon or a Catholic ever been allowed to pray or lead a service behind an evangelical church, behind an evangelical pulpit? No. Would a Catholic or Pentecostal been given the time of day at a Southern Baptist church 40 or 50 years ago when taking the pulpit? No. Would a political leader who lies and slanders and uses the Lord's name in vain been allowed to speak at any mega Southern Baptist church 40 years ago? No.
And he said, I'm doing good, you're doing good? I said, yeah. I said, you know, you don't like me, and I don't like you. I never have liked you, and you never have liked me. But you're going to support me because you're a rich guy. And if you don't support me, you're going to be so poor, you're not going to believe it. Yeah.
But I fast forward you to where we are today. We are already compromised. Why? Because we do not care about doctrine and truth any longer. We have elevated the cares of the nation and our flesh over truth. And it will end in the same way. Disaster. So my question to you is, are you going to compromise your faith, your doctrine, for man-made problems like liberal churches did, and make the same mistake that they did, and compromise everything that they believe in? Or are you going to stand on doctrine, pray, and leave these issues to a faithful Creator? Because right now there is a large part of evangelical and charismatic Christianity that is selling their birthright for a pot of soup, and it will not last. They are compromising everything they believe in for something that is like the grass that fades. But if you believe that we need to be a Christian nation, then you need to decide which version of Christian you want to be. Because if you don't think that after the so-called Christians have won, that there won't be a battle for which version of Christianity we will become, you are ignorant of history. Because this is exactly why our founding fathers made us a secular nation and not a Christian nation. They had all seen it before, and they didn't want to see it again. Because they had never seen a so-called Christian nation that wasn't ruled by tyrants, that didn't see a war fought out for what version of Christianity was going to rise to the top. And if you don't think it won't happen now, you're fooling yourself. So, I want to thank you for joining me today. I will finish up the introduction to Dominionism by looking at what can go wrong when a country gives in to Dominionist leadership. And until next time, may God richly bless you, beloved of the Lord.